I am an attorney, so this is a brief disclaimer sheet that every attorney is going to have. I am an attorney. I may be your attorney. You should already know if I'm your attorney or not. And me giving this presentation in and of itself does not make me your attorney. All right? Let's just keep that in mind. Without further ado, my name is Cedric DeHue. My firm is DeHue Law. I do patent preparation prosecution services, especially in the life sciences area. I want to thank Akina for offering this time and having this presentation. And what I really wanted to talk about was the intersection of patent law and cancer research. So, as any patent attorney is going to do, we're going to have a brief discussion of what patent law is, followed by what cancer is to patentability. Then we're going to go through the particular area of interest, which is patent-eligible framework, as described by Mayo and Alice Supreme Court cases. Go through some updates, some hypothetical cases. We'll have some test cases in there, and it's going to get pretty upsetting at the end there, so we'll end on a good note in talking about the USPTO's Cancer Moonshot Program, specifically its Patents for Patients pilot. So what constitutes a patent? I think most of you are fairly familiar with this. I'm not going to read all of this information. Just want to remind you that a patent is not an enforceable, personal right to practice, but it's always a right to exclude others from doing something. And we'll be talking about all of the areas of patentability very briefly initially, but we're really going to focus on 35 U.S.C. 101, which is talking about patent-eligible subject matter in detail. I'd be remiss to go and have a discussion about patent law without at least going through all of the different areas of patentability. And so you talk about 101, we talk about what is patent subject matter, patentable subject matter, and you can see the definition there. Now, the code also goes into details about particular exclusions, and those exclusions are going to be very important. We're going to be talking about the exclusions of laws of nature, abstract ideas, mathematical formulas, and we'll go into a fair amount of detail later on. But just to have a brief discussion initially, some other areas of required to meet patentability is 102, which is novelty, right? Where is your idea already in the public's knowledge in four corners of one document, right? And you'll also see that we have 103, which deals with obviousness. Can you take two or more things that the public was already aware of? Would one or skill in the art take more than two or three things, put them together, and reach your invention? So you have to meet that standard as well in order to reach patentability. There are a number of requirements that deal more with how the patent application is drafted and filed and submitted, and the disclosures that are included within. Those are covered in 112, and they deal with things like the written description requirement. The easiest way to describe that is to talk about, is the patent applicant in possession of the invention? And the standard there is to ensure that you show in enough detail that you have possession of the invention. Simple example would be, relevant to this conference and the people who are in attendance, is if you filed an application that said, I have a cure for all forms of cancer, right? And you provided no additional detail beyond that, right? Well, that would most likely receive a rejection under written description because that's pretty hard to do, and you're going to need to show us and show that you have possession of that invention. Furthermore, you're also going to need to show us that you can enable one of ordinary skill in the art to perform your claimed invention in a way that requires no undue experimentation, right? You have to lay out the steps of how you're going to cure cancer, and it's going to have to be fairly detailed. These are all requirements that deal with patentability, and specifically 112. There are additional ones. The best mode is one where you need to disclose what is the best way of performing your invention. It has lost some of its teeth in the American Invents Act. We don't need to go into a lot of detail here, but it's just a safeguard against an inventor who tries to obtain a patent without making the full disclosure associated with their invention. Okay? Finally, we have indefiniteness, which deals with how are the claims structured. Is it clear as to what the patent applicant is stating is the scope of their invention and what they want to be able to exclude others from doing? Can you go in there and say, well, it could possibly be this, it could possibly be that? Well, that doesn't lend to a lot of certainty to the public as to whether that claim is being infringed or not, right? You say it could include peanut butter, it might not, it possibly could include some cancer drug or something like that. No. We need to know specifically what are the scopes and what is your claim scope exactly. And so if you don't have that indefiniteness requirement met, then your claims are not going to be able to get through examination. All right. So enough of the background stuff. Let's talk some more about cancer research, things that are relevant to our presentation today. Where is cancer biology for patentability? This is from this is a little bit older report from NIH that's looking at the amount of funding given to different categories, cancer being one of them. While there's 285 categories, cancer is one of the many. I'd be remiss as an attorney to describe that there are several different ways that cancer is classified, especially by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The Patent and Trademark Office, I'll just call it USPTO going forward, has 30 different patent classifications that deal in one way, shape, or form with cancer. There are other classification systems like the Cooperative Patent Classification System, International Patent Classification System. And of course, there are thousands of keyword variants, even some of the ones that have been described here, talking about kinase and phosphorylation and things of that nature. That metastasis was mentioned several times as well. So all of these are different ways that we could talk about cancer, and we're just going to talk about it in the broadest possible terms possible, okay? We're not going to go into a lot of detail. And when we talk specifically about the area of focus, we want to differentiate between claims that deal with a method of treating cancer versus claims that deal with methods of diagnosing, observing, screening cancer. Those are really going to be the focus of our discussion. Why are we talking specifically about cancer and having this challenge with patent-eligible subject matter? This chart is informative. If you see here, you have the total number of patents issued, and you've got the number of cancer patents granted, and all of a sudden it just like falls off a cliff, right? Well, there are a couple of things that happened. One happened here in the end of halfway through 2012, and another that happened halfway through 2014 that are relevant to this discussion. If you also look, it's the same information here as well for the patents granted in blue, but you can also see that the number of patents filed has dropped off dramatically. And this is all information gathered from the cancer moonshot data of this year. Again, you can see the correlation between these things that occurred in 2012 and 2014 with a significant drop-off. The purpose of this discussion is we're going to look at is whether these claims are considered patent eligible, right, under the Alice and Mayo framework. We're going to look at some hypothetical cases, at least one hypothetical case, and we're going to look at some historical examples. And we're going to see that there's a pretty straightforward reason why you're seeing such a drop-off in the number of patents filed, the number of patent applications filed, and the number of patents granted from these decisions that came out of the Supreme Court. Let's talk about the patent eligibility framework. There was a case, Mayo v. Prometheus, in 2012, decided by the Supreme Court, and there was another one, Alice v. CLS Bank, 2014. I'll be talking about it generically as the Alice-Mayo framework, just to simplify things. But when we talk about individual cases, I'll probably just describe them as Mayo and Alice, okay, just to keep things simple. Mayo is the most relevant case to our discussion. In here, the Supreme Court unanimously, so there was really no debate on this from the justices, unanimously ruled that the claims directed to methods involving administering a drug to patients, measuring metabolites with known efficacy thresholds in mind, using that data to inform dosage, was not patent-eligible subject matter under 101, right? Well, okay. Well, we can look and see what the particular, underlying subject matter was. Here you have a prodrug, right? And the prodrug is metabolized down to the 6-MP, which is the active pharmaceutical ingredient. What Prometheus was doing is they were looking at this relationship of two of the metabolites from 6-MP. They were looking at 6-thioguanine, they were looking at 6-methylthioguanine, and that relationship told them whether the 6-MP was still in its efficacious range in the patient, right? So you would administer the drug, and you would detect 6-thioguanine, and if you go to the next slide here, you would also measure 6-methyl-mercaptopurine, and it gave the particular ranges, right? The claims gave the particular ranges. If you're above a certain concentration in red blood cell, you decrease the dosage. If you're below a certain concentration, you take another action, right? It's pretty straightforward. Well, this seems like, there's value associated with this sort of test. I mean, I think most people would agree with that. So why would this be considered patent ineligible subject matter? Well, there's a tortuous history for the Mayo framework. We started with the district court, and it decides that it's patent invalid under 101. Prometheus goes to the Federal Circuit, and they disagree with the district court. Mayo then appeals to the Supreme Court, who remands the case back to the Federal Circuit, decision upheld. Mayo again appeals, and then we get our ruling, right, that this is not patent eligible subject matter. Now, the Supreme Court finally opined that the correlation between a naturally produced metabolite and the efficacy toxicity are unpatentable subject matter under 101. What is going on here? I mean, this straightforward. It seems as if you have a test, you have a kit, you've got a diagnostic system that is telling you whether this drug is in its efficacious range. Why is this patent ineligible? Right? Well, there's a problem. 101 deals with all areas of patent law. It's not specific to just, the sciences, not specific just to engineering. It covers everything. And the real focus here, from my understanding, is that we have a lot of cases of business method patents and software-related patents that are getting through the system, and there's this concern that we are getting too many of these patents out. And the Supreme Court, through a number of decisions, not just this Mayo framework, not just through Alice, is really trying to curtail that, right? But their curtailing does have an effect in other areas, such as in cancer research as well. For looking at the final decision, the Supreme Court says, okay, this is a natural law. And as I mentioned before, patent eligible subject matter, there's particular areas that are eligible and there are specific exceptions, and natural law is one of them. That the idea that this naturally produced metabolite and its therapeutic value does not represent patent eligible subject matter, it states here that the Supreme Court concluded that the application of this newly discovered law is normally unpatentable if the application relies merely upon elements already known in the art. What does that sound like? That actually sounds more like 102, right? Novelty, right? It sounds more like obviousness than it does explicit inclusion or exclusion based upon patent-eligible subject matter. That's part of the problem. We can also look and see what the United States Patent and Trademark Office does through its Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, where it goes and incorporates the Mayo decision into its body of law that all examiners use. And it talks about how these explicit exceptions to patent-eligible subject matter, abstract ideas, laws of nature, natural phenomena, are the basic tools of scientific and technological work, right? Well, if it's so basic, why can't we just use the other parts of the patentability analysis to exclude these things? Why can't we just rely on whether it's novel or whether it's non-obvious as the basis? Use those as the levers, because then those levers are going to be specific to each industry, right? Where is the public's knowledge in cancer research relative to where is the public's knowledge in, say, the next iPhone, right? Why can't we just use that instead? Well, it's not my decision to make. I'm just up here reporting what's already occurred. I talk about Mayo Alice because the Alice decision incorporates this Mayo framework. This Mayo framework being a two-part test. Is the subject matter directed to patent-ineligible concepts such as law of nature? And then does the claim include enough additional details to transform the nature of the claims into something that's patent-eligible? The subject matter and the details of Alice are just not as relevant to our discussion as Mayo v. Prometheus. But this framework is what we are seeing as the cause for the drop in the number of patents granted in cancer, especially in the diagnostic systems cases, as well as the number of applications filed. You know, as we stated before, this does not deal as much so with, methods of treatment or the compositions, as long as those compositions are not based upon, if they are not markedly different in characteristic to something that's a naturally occurring product. Okay? So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. And there. Okay. So we have a number of additional cases that have come forward. These are the most relevant because they were decided by the same court and they are applicable throughout all of the court system. Where in the Cleveland Clinic Foundation, True Health, the U.S. Supreme Court denied certiorari, which meant that the Federal Circuit's decision to decide that the methods of assessing a test subject's risk are patent ineligible for the exact same reasons under the Alice and Mayo framework. We have another case from 2008 where the Federal Circuit upheld claims to methods of treatment. So you're starting to see the differentiation here, right? If you're looking at methods of treatment and you're looking at particular compositions of drugs and stuff like that, as long as you're markedly different, you're in good shape with this patent eligible framework. If you are assessing, if you are observing, if you are screening, if you are diagnosing, you're going to run up against this issue of being considered patent ineligible under this Alice-Mayo framework. Okay? All right. Lots of head nods. That's always good. So the USPTO incorporated this same structure into the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure. We already talked about things that are markedly different characteristics to what occurs in nature. That deals with your example of different drugs. If you're looking at methods of treatment, methods of producing, this particular MPP section actually distinguishes between methods of treating and methods of producing relative to methods of observing and detecting. So methods of observing and detecting really run this risk of not being considered patent eligible, while methods of treating and methods of producing don't even have to go through the first step of the analysis. They just move on through. Let's talk about novelty, let's talk about obviousness for those. And this is a problem. This is a real concern. What we'll do here is talk about cancer diagnostic systems and give some specific examples as to why this could be such a problem going forward, right? First thing we can do is say that the Alice-Mayo framework tells us that simply drawing from a law of nature is not sufficient for patent-eligible subject matter, right? Especially observing or detecting. Well, let's think of some hypothetical or historical cases that would have had to go through this same framework and see what sort of effect would have occurred from it, right? Here you have Waldeyer. He's credited with the introduction of hematoxylin and eosin staining for tissue stains, right? My wife's a pathologist, and there are 2.5 to 3 million pathology slides read every single day now, right? Given this invention, and given, say, let's make the claim very simple. It's just the introduction of hematoxylin into tissue for staining purposes. Really? All you're doing is you're providing a stain that's going to go into the cytoplasm or the nucleus of a cell, and you're looking at the pattern. You're looking at the cell morphology. That cell morphology is then matched to historical records of similar pattern morphologies for lifetime survival. That's how we get our staging system in pathology, right? Do you think that that invention would be considered patent eligible under the current Alice-Mayo framework? It would struggle, right? Because it's simply observing or diagnosing based upon a law of nature. That morphology is going to occur in the cells because of how far along they've progressed, and you're just illustrating it, you're just observing it, right? Halsted was a contemporary of Waldmeyer, and he is well known for his radical mastectomy for breast cancer removal, right? It's a treatment method. So under our patent eligible structure, it seems like it would go through just fine. There's a problem. Halsted was known for these very aggressive, disfiguring breast cancer surgeries because he never knew where the cancer cells were. He never knew where the margins of a cancer tumor lie. And he didn't know if it had metastasized or if it was in the lymph system or if it was intercalated with normal tissue, like a lot of the things that we look at now. He just didn't know. So he would remove not only the breast, but typically a lot of the ribs, sometimes the underarms, parts of the shoulder, just to try to stay ahead of where the cancer could be, right? Is that what we really want? Or would it be beneficial to reward Waldmeyer for his contribution of observing where the cancer boundaries are and assisting Halsted to ensure that he doesn't disfigure more than is necessary, right, to treat the cancer? That's my contention. I like the way that this BPCR is set up as a soapbox, because I really feel like I'm getting on a soapbox here. So here's another example. We have J.J. Thomson and Aston, who worked together to be the first to use mass spec, and Aston won the Nobel Prize for his discovery of isotopes in 212 different elements. All right? Now, the actual discovery, the observation and detection of the different isotopes may still, have this same patent eligible issue, right? While the mass spectrograph, now mass spectrometers, may be eligible, patent eligible. Okay, so you can see how much of the contribution is just observation to discovery really plays into whether the subject matter, the claims that are associated with it, are going to be considered patent ineligible or eligible, right? Applications like the mass spectrograph or the mass spectrometer of this day and age would probably pass through and then have to be considered under novelty and obviousness as to whether it was still patentable, right? You have Tanaka and Fenn, who together shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for mass spec analysis of biological macromolecules. Tanaka with his soft laser desorption, Fenn with electrospray ionization, right? Now there, it's pretty clear. If you're looking at the particular systems, the soft laser desorption or the ESI, those are going to be patentable because you're looking at the components of an application and you're not looking so much so at a method of observing or detecting. Now, if the claims were as broad as to say just a method of observing biological macromolecules, even that claim may have struggled under this Alice-Mayo framework, right? While if you're looking at the particulars of the SLD or the ESI system, those claims would probably pass. Follow? All right. Here's another hypothetical case. You have a method of diagnosing or screening pancreatic cancer. As Akanakure talked about earlier with ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer is also known as a silent killer because it is typically diagnosed very late and has a very high death rate because of it. If it is detected much earlier, it's much more treatable. You just remove it, right? And so would a method that consisted of a small carbon nanotube deposited dipstick with methylphthalate antibodies be considered patent eligible under this structure? Could kind of go either way, right? I mean, it depends, right? I'm an attorney. You got to give me that. It depends. Now, if you structured the claim as broadly as saying just a method of diagnosing or screening, I think it's dead. If you go into a fair amount of detail as to how the dipstick is structured, how the method is performed, things of that nature, it's more likely to survive under a transformation of the second step of the Alice-Mayo framework, right? And so under that scenario, you know, there's a challenge here in that the overarching idea is challenged by the Alice-Mayo framework, while the particular application may be able to move forward, right? But it's really the overarching idea that provides a lot of value to the public, because this new diagnosis screening technique could very easily improve upon our treatment of pancreatic cancer, right? And if we don't protect an individual who develops the overarching method or this new diagnostic screening system, we run the risk of not being able to progress in the treatment of it later on. As Peter Drucker as well stated for saying, if you can't measure it, you can't improve upon it, right? And this new structure of the Alice-Mayo framework can really challenge that we are moving forward in the observation and the measurement portion, and therefore later on we may struggle even more with the treatment. So we've got the USPTO has really been trying to focus on finding ways to accelerate examination for cancer-related applications. One is this Patents for Patients pilot program. It's been extended till the end of the year, so you've got a little bit more time. It does require that you have at least one claim to the method of treating cancer using immunotherapy, right? That's the qualifications for it. It's got great results. So the number of applications or petitions that have been submitted are overwhelmingly granted, and the prosecution has completed in a lot of those applications as well. If you look here, you can even see that some of these applications were filed, you know, a year or so ago, and they've already closed, right? So the form of accelerated examination is very valuable, especially when you consider that a patent term is 20 years from the earliest filing date. If your application just kind of sits there and languishes, you may not get to have as much value once it's issued. Takeaways. Eligibility standards under Alice-Mayo framework affect all inventions. Diagnostic claims may struggle to find patent-eligible subject matter, regardless of their benefit to society. The more detail that you have as to the mechanism, method of observation, detection, provides more opportunities to transform that second step in the Alice-Mayo framework. And inclusion of at least one immunotherapy-related claim can accelerate examination. All right. Questions, and it depends. Thank you. Yes, Sean. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.